And he talks about, I don't know why he's only quoting the Israeli ups here. Let me see if I can find the page. He does this a lot throughout the book. Oh, and I hate this slimy The thing that upsets me the most now is, I don't know if this guy hasn't just not read the book, in which case he's an asshole because he's quoting shit he hasn't read from a book pretending he read it, or he has read the book and he is being incredibly dishonest. Yeah, so I'm just gonna read like a couple paragraphs here, okay? A lot of what I've said before reading this book was correct. It was just more correct than I even realized. Now I have a deeper understanding of why it was correct. My takeaway in the debate with him was that this quote was not saying that it was a bad deal for the Palestinians. That remains true to this day. Wait, somebody link me his video on this. The Twitter one. Watch loaner boxes. It's an hour long. To cover a 10-minute Twitter video? Assembly resolutions are non-binding. You look at like a resolution like 242, it doesn't.
242 is Security Council though, right? Also, just to be clear, no one gives a fuck about international law, like when it comes to this stuff. People who invoke 242 like it's gospel would also say that the Palestinians were completely justified in fighting against the partition plan. Okay, so this
That's true.
dude, Palestinian American, I think, debate Destiny, seems to be there's some claims of disinfo.
Fuck bastard. Are you going on a debate panel or something?
No, but thanks for the dono, again. Okay, so let's see. Because I've been asked to review this. Let's go.
So I had a long conversation with Destiny about Palestine and Israel. And within just a few minutes of hearing him speak, I realized that Nathan Robinson's description of him as having sub-Wikipedia level knowledge on the issue was actually too generous of Nathan.
Ooh.
And what's remarkable is that even though Destiny was clearly out of his depth, that did not shake his confidence one bit. He projected authority by ridiculing the facts I was bringing up, even though he had absolutely no clue what he was talking about.
So to be clear, you're saying before that, you're saying that the Israeli official policy was to use human shields? That was codified in the military doctrine.
That's official
so
policy.
great. This is not true. Fuck me. I didn't even know the details of this. This is not true. I was confident though, without knowing 100%. Well, mainly because I was just asking for a source for it and he didn't have one, but this is absolutely not true. Or like, I'm correct here. I'm just more correct than I even realized. The original video, okay, thank you. I don't need to watch Leonardbox. Well, I'll watch his video. I'll give a response, then we'll watch Leonardbox's response.
So I had a long conversation with Destiny about Palestine and Israel. And within just a few minutes of hearing him speak, I realized that Nathan Robinson's description of him as having sub-Wikipedia level knowledge on the issue was actually too generous of Nathan. And what's remarkable is that even though Destiny was clearly out of his depth, that did not shake his confidence one bit. He projected authority by ridiculing the facts I was bringing up, even though he had absolutely no clue what he was talking about.
So to be clear, you're saying before that, you're saying that the Israeli official policy was to use human shields? That was cool. Didn't you already watch this video? Yeah, I watched a little bit of it, but then I did a bunch of reading on international law and shit. We did that. And then I've read like 2/3 of this book that I'll try to finish maybe tonight, but. Codified in the military doctrine.
That's
it's so crazy that they say that, yet the only image I've ever seen of the human shield is that one boy on the Jeep that gets posted 50 billion times over and over again, but okay.
But confidently dismissing facts doesn't change that they're true. Here is a BBC News article about how the Israeli Supreme Court banned the Israeli military from using Palestinian civilians as human shields.
Okay, so real quick. IDF to appeal human shield ban. So this policy that's being described here is what the IDF used to do. Is when the IDF was doing operations in, I think this was mainly the West Bank, but it might be the West Bank and Gaza. What the IDF would do is, if they had to raid a house because they thought that, no, I think it was for Hamas. I think it was the Gaza Strip, I think. But when the IDF was gonna raid a house, instead of walking up, banging in the house, and being like, hey, IDF, get the fuck out of here, blah, blah, blah. What they would do is they would try to conscript is a strong word. They would ask a civilian in the area, hey, do you want to go up, knock on this door and say, hey, the IDF is outside. Do you want to come out and talk to them, et cetera, et cetera. Because the IDF, what their argument was that this leads to less confrontation. That with the IDF banging at your door, the chance for that encounter to turn lethal is really high because people will start shooting. It just escalates things like crazy. Now, the issue was, I believe there were a couple times where people were, I think civilians claimed, I should look into the particular case. I think civilians claimed that they felt pressured to act basically at the behest of the IDF. And there might have been one or two times where there was a claim that the IDF did force somebody, you need to go and do this at like gunpoint, basically. Oh, that's a really good fact if that's true. Dirty Hagrid in chat says only one civilian died out of like 2,300 scenarios. If that's true, I would very much like a source for that. I'll see if that guy links a source for that. How do you feel about Lex getting castigated by DGG for offending Empress Anna by suggesting a Putin interview? We've made Anna into a god cringe. No, I think Lex was being a little bit cringe there. I think it was okay to criticize Lex for... Tucker Carlson is just not the man to interview Putin. He doesn't have the background for it. He doesn't have the history for it. He doesn't have the chops for it. He doesn't have the freedom to navigate that interview in a responsible way. I think it was totally fine to be critical of that and to criticize people that were being blanketly supportive of it, I think. But Destiny, death is immaterial in that case. The argument was, is the use of civilians in that manner justified or not? Sure, you can make that argument, but the purpose of human shields is to reduce the likelihood that like an enemy combatant will be targeting your soldiers. I don't think we would say that the intention of the policy, at least, was in this case to use human shields to prevent the enemy from like attacking you. I think the goal here is de-escalation of a situation. Now, whether you agree that that's how it played out, it would be interesting to get data on this. I'll throw this at the bottom of my war crimes article. Nope. International. Yeah, oh wait, war crimes article. Throw it at the bottom of this. The stated goal of the policy, and you can see how the goal might be that, is it was to reduce casualties. It wasn't to basically shield yourself with civilians or co-locate them in a way where it's like, okay, well now they can't just strike us, you know? There's a reason you don't have your lights on the back yet, because my shit kept breaking my circuit breaker, flipping my fuse. Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz is prepared to make a personal appearance in court to defend the practice, ministry officials say. The Israeli Defense Ministry will appeal against a Supreme Court ruling banning the use of Palestinian human shields in raids, officials say. This phrasing is really wild. Yeah. Human rights groups have frequently condemned the use of human shields. The Israeli military believes that the use of Palestinian civilians can often defuse a tense situation. Mr. Mofaz is also set to argue that alternative methods of apprehending suspects, such as through the use of bulldozers, would endanger the lives of both Israeli soldiers and Palestinian civilians, a military source said. Early warning, the Israeli Supreme Court issued its formal ruling last week saying the practice violates international law. It had already issued a temporary injunction against the practice in 2002 after a teenager was killed when troops made him negotiate with a wanted militant. The court ruled out both the placing of civilians in front of soldiers on operations and an early warning procedure employed by the army. In this practice, the Israeli army would force local Palestinians to approach the homes of militants and ask them to surrender. So it wasn't supposed to be by force. The policy was supposed to be by request. Yeah, but... So the idea that, I wish actually, I should have the actual case. I'll just write it in here. This is my understanding for now. If you don't believe me, that's fine. Go look it up. But I'll do this later.
The Israeli military establishment and the defense minister protested that ban because it was useful for them as a matter of policy. And that practice...
Destiny, that gets kind of thorny, but if human shields actually worked and were they deployed on both sides, they would be casualty reducing? No. The badness of a human shield is inherently related to the fact that they don't work with certainty. I understand what you're saying, Irk, but I think if we think about like what is the goal of like a human shield or what is the purpose of a human shield, I think it's generally to foster hesitancy in the adversary when it comes to conducting military operations against you. That's like the goal. I don't know if asking a civilian like, hey, can you knock on that door and tell this dude that we want to come out and chat with him? Like, does that fulfill the spirit of a human shield? I'd be curious if there are other cases where that's true. Now, the Israeli Supreme Court felt that they ruled that they felt enough like it's close enough that why risk it? That just looks bad. But the ironic thing is the discontinuation of that practice probably leads to the increase in actual deaths of Palestinians. So, yeah, I don't know.
Continues even after the ban. And that practice...
Israeli soldiers punished for refusing. Boy, is human shield inadequate. I also like that he doesn't actually link the policy, because also keep in mind his claim was there was a policy of using human shields. And he doesn't actually link the policy, he just links these two fucking articles. But
this continues even after the ban. Destiny also claimed that Amnesty International had accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields in 2014.
Do you also acknowledge that they say that things like Hamas... Wait, there was a case where the IDF required a Palestinian to clear an entrance they thought was booby-trapped in 2009. Yeah, well, but if that was in 2009, that was after this policy had been banned anyway. That was just a conscription of a soldier or a civilian, probably in a way that would actually be a human shield, undeniably. If what you're saying is how it happened, that would just be, yeah, the IDF using a human shield to avoid damage. You can't do that, for sure.
Accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields in 2014.
Do you also acknowledge that they say that things like Hamas uses human shields?
Yes.
Amnesty International says that?
They do not. What human rights organizations accuse Hamas of, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, is the fact that they operate in civilian areas and hide in civilian areas which endanger civilians.
So an issue that I run into here is I shouldn't say that Amnesty International says that they use human shields, because Amnesty International doesn't say they use human shields. Amnesty International says that they do things that count as human shields, which he says as much. But for some reason, Amnesty International doesn't call it human shields. I don't know why, but I think it's pretty unambiguous that it can be concluded that the use of human shields requires an intentional co-location of military objectives and civilians or persons hors de combat, meaning people that aren't capable of fighting, with the specific intent of trying to prevent the targeting of those military objectives. That's what this is.
Is the fact that they operate in civilian areas and hide in civilian areas which endanger civilians.
That's what you do. You operate in civilian areas and you endanger civilians in an attempt to dissuade the enemy from attacking those areas, right? Also, this is Rule 97 on the human shields for the International Humanitarian Law Database, for customary international humanitarian law. This is also technically it's a violation of... I need to have all these remembered. I'm going to reread these over and over again because I need to just remember these. This would be Article 51, Protocol. Okay, this is Article 51 of Protocol 1 in addition to the Geneva Conventions of 1949. Article 51 talks about protection of the civilian population. The civilian population and individual civilians shall enjoy general protection against dangers arising from military operations. To give effect to this protection, the following rules, which are additional to other applicable rules of international law, shall be observed in all circumstances. Oh, no, wait, this isn't the obligation to protect, is it? No, this is on the attacker side. Precautions. Article 58, the parties to the conflict shall, to the maximum extent feasible, without prejudice to Article 49 of the Fourth Convention, endeavor to remove the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under their control from the vicinity of military objectives. This is a precaution against the effects of attack. So this is the obligation on the defenders. Avoid locating military objectives within or near densely populated areas, and then take the other necessary precautions to protect the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under their control against the danger resulting from military operations. So Hamas clearly fails in this obligation under Article 58 of Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention stuff. And then I think there is there a war crime related to this? There is. So under Article 8 of the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court, for the purpose of this statute, war crime means other serious violations of the law and customs applicable in international armed conflict within the established framework of international law, namely any of the following acts. So this would be Article 8, Section 2, subsection B23, utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations. So when he's talking about operating out of civilian areas, that's essentially that's basically what we're talking about here. So it's a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It's a violation of international humanitarian law, customary. Hold on, I need to get this right. Customary international humanitarian law. I think I did say that. And it's actually a war crime as defined in the International Criminal Court. Operating out of civilian areas counts as utilizing human shields.
Was that much. That is not the legal definition of human shield.
That is the legal definition.
I know what human rights is that much. The fact that they operate in civilian nations accuse Hamas of, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, is the fact that they operate in civilian areas and hide in civilian areas which endanger civilians. They acknowledge that much. That is not the legal definition of human shield.
That is the operating in those, utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations. That is the definition of human shields. And that is what that Amnesty International report attests to. I just didn't read further, I guess, when I read it the first time, because Amnesty International doesn't actually call it a human shield. They say there was no evidence of human shielding while giving the examples of human shielding. So I don't know why Amnesty International does that. Fuck, I'm not gonna be able to find that particular report, but yeah. It's the legal definition.
I know what human rights organizations document.
Well, you don't. You didn't know that in 2014, Amnesty International said that Hamas was using human shields. So,
Again,
so they didn't really say they were using human shields. They described the behavior that would be the equivalent to human shields. But
you don't know what you're talking about.
oh, I've actually read the reports. You should try it sometime.
Well, let's look at the Amnesty reports of 2014. Addressing Israel's claims of human shields during the assault, Amnesty International said they have no evidence that Palestinian civilians were intentionally being used as human shields.
So this part here is true that in order for this war crime to actually be a war crime, you need to have the intention, the criminal intent of utilizing the presence of a civilian in order to render a certain point unattackable. So for instance, let's say that I am a military combatant and I think there's like an abandoned apartment building and I run into that apartment building and I'm conducting warfare there. And then let's say that my enemies realize, fuck, he just ran into an apartment building. There's actually 100 civilians in the top story. That doesn't actually count as a war crime on my part because I didn't know they were up there. The intention isn't proved. Now, while that's true, Hamas is never doing their own investigations, and it's almost certain that in these, like, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming that Hamas does operate in these areas with intent, and I think they've made other statements saying as much, and there's been other circumstantial evidence proving as much. If you really want to say that you don't have evidence that they're intentionally using these civilians for human shielding, fine, but if you want to use that standard, you have no evidence that Israel has ever done a war crime ever, because the standard of evidence that you're requiring here is insane.
Intentionally being used as human shields. After the assault, they issued another report saying that
several of these actions, which have been discussed above, such as storing munitions in civilian buildings and launching attacks in the vicinity of civilian buildings, violate the obligation to take all feasible precautions to protect civilians from the effects of attacks. While this is true, it does violate that obligation to take all... Wait, no, hold on. I am so sorry. Hold on, no. I don't believe that's true. I think this is a... Fuck. I feel weird contradicting these people. You really shouldn't listen to me over them. But when they say here that storing munitions in civilian buildings is violating the obligation to take all feasible precautions to protect civilians from the effects of attacks, I don't know if that is necessarily talking about precaution against the effects of attacks. This is precaution against the effects of attacks. That's talking about how if you're going to go to war and you're staging in some city and blah, 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 you should try to get civilians out first. Co-locating munitions in civilian buildings, co-locating military and civilian objectives together, that is a war crime. That's utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations. It's not like Hamas is just like, oh, fuck, like we're in the middle of combat, we got to store it here. They explicitly co-locate here, which is the act of human shielding. I think this is a different obligation that's being spoken about here. I would disagree with the Amnesty International report. If the author ever wants to come on and chat on a stream, I don't know if anybody wants to ever reach out to him, but yeah. But they do not necessarily amount to the specific violation of using human shields under international humanitarian law, which entails using the presence or movements of civilians or other protected persons to render certain points or areas or military forces immune from military attacks. Why? I don't know, but why wouldn't it? I mean, that's true. It doesn't necessarily amount to it, but bro, you're storing munitions in a civilian building? What other reason could there be for that? There's no other place to store this stuff? The practices most commonly condemned as such have involved actually moving civilians to military objectives in order to shield those objectives from attack. That, while that's true, that's weaselly, that's not the only way. This is a really common way to use human shields, but it's not the only way to use human shields. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, the use of human shields requires an intentional co-location of military objectives in civilians or persons who state combat with the specific intent of trying to prevent the targeting of those military objectives. This last part is true. I don't see how that doesn't count as here. You're co-locating a military objective and a civilian objective. You're storing munitions in a civilian building. Unless you think the only saving grace here is if you think, well, maybe Hamas just puts them there because there's nowhere else to put them. I think that's a little bit goofy, but...
that even though Hamas's conduct endangered civilians, it did not necessarily amount to using human shields. But more surprising was that Destiny did not have a basic understanding of the core issues in Palestine and Israel. He didn't even understand that Israel's entire presence in the West Bank is considered a military occupation that Israel was obligated to end, and that every last settlement that Israel built in the West Bank is considered illegal under international law. I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. The idea is Israel's presence in the West Bank is illegal. They have to leave.
Whether something is legal... So when we talk about legality here, bilateral treaties are going to supersede basically everything when it comes to international law. So regardless of what international law says, if you and me, I'm a country and you're a country, if we sign a treaty, the rest of the UN, Assembly, whatever else can suck our dick. It doesn't matter. We've signed a treaty. That is going to be the superseding document that determines the final negotiations for whatever territories or whatever else is going on here. Now, the Palestinian occupied territories have gotten more complicated because as part of Egypt signing a bilateral treaty with Israel, they have rejected any claim to the Gaza Strip. And when Jordan signed peace with Israel, they also, not only did they reject claims to it, they also walled it off. They closed the highways because they didn't want any Palestinians coming back in. I think the expansion of settlements now is probably illegal. That's probably true. But the legal situation is it's quite dicey. At the very least, I would condemn it. And I said it's a bad idea. But like clearly illegal, I mean, probably, but it's very, very, very complicated and dicey. Yeah. Whether something is legal or illegal, it's not really at issue here. Like everything here, the legality of all of this is.
And when he did not like what international law has to say,
when I say the legality of all of this is contested, again, like the meaning of 242 over time has also changed. Again, initially 242 didn't require the withdrawal from all territories. In fact, it was after Eshkol. Perez? Shimon? Let's see. Egypt, Israel treaty. When I do the timeline, I'm going to remember all these prime ministers. Egypt, Israel, Wikipedia, treaty, peace. Who is the... Oh, no, it was Begin. I should know this. This guy used to be insane, and he did this peace treaty. Good for him. Although he had to. When Israel signed that peace treaty with Egypt, they had considered the obligation settled under 242. And remember, 242 doesn't recognize the Palestinian right to a state. 242 just says there has to be a just resolution to the problem. It doesn't talk about self-determination of the Palestinians or anything like that at all. All of course it is.
And when he did not like what international law has to say, he manufactured complexity and ambiguity where there was none. The entire international human rights consensus and international law consensus on this, which is that Israel's occupation and settlements and wall in the West Bank are absolutely and categorically illegal. I would like to touch on a couple of...
there's also an argument, I think, under the Oslo Accords, that the beginning of the Oslo Accord process, one of the negative things for the Palestinians is the Oslo Accords in some ways legitimized the expansions, the settlements in the West Bank as well, which also makes it kind of hairy. Again, like the legality question here, first of all, we're saying like human rights organizations or UN General Assembly, like all the UN General Assembly resolutions are non-binding. When you look at like a resolution like 242, it doesn't even really make sense.
Well, first of all, UN Resolution 242 is not a General Assembly resolution, it's a Security Council resolution, and those are...
It is a Security Council resolution, which makes it binding. The problem, and I should have been way more clear here, the problem is that it didn't really call for anything. Like 242 is just words on paper that don't really mean much, because 242 is calling, there's just nothing clear. We can read it. It just doesn't mean much. The Security Council expressing its continuing concern with the grave situation in the Middle East, emphasizing the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war and the need to work for a just and lasting peace in which every state in the area can live in security. So this is weird because, remember, the only way that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were obtained by Israel was from war. The only way that they were obtained, though, by Jordan and Egypt was also from war. Remember, Jordan and Egypt invaded in 48 and also conquered that territory. So was it admissible in 48 but not in 67? So it's kind of weird. And this will all be fought in future Israeli agreements, bilateral agreements with other countries. But what this means is contested. Emphasizing further that all member states and their acceptance of the Charter of the United Nations have undertaken the commitment to act in accordance with Article 2 of the Charter, affirms that the fulfillment of Charter principles requires the establishment of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, which should include the application of both the following principles. So something I wasn't aware before, this wording was fought over a lot. Withdrawal of Israel armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. The original wording of this was supposed to be withdrawal of Israel armed forces from the territories occupied in the recent conflict, meaning all of the territories. The wording on this was fought over a lot because Israel didn't want to acknowledge that they needed to withdraw from all territories. And again, when Israel finally withdrew from the Sinai, when they negotiated peace with Egypt, they considered that, and I believe Egypt might have as well, considered that a fulfillment of Resolution 242. Now, on later negotiations, Israel would walk that back and say, okay, well, actually, I think it might have been under the Oslo Accords. We're going to acknowledge that we haven't fulfilled 242 yet. But again, it's like a back and forth kind of hairy, weird thing. And then 2 is termination of all claims or stakes of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries, free from threats or acts of force. The states in the area are Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Palestine is never mentioned here in 242, and neither are Palestinians' right to, I think, self-determination. It affirms further the necessity for guaranteeing freedom of navigation through international waterways in the area, for achieving, remember, this is because of all the Sinai shit, closure of the Strait of Tiran, that causes belly for Israel to go to war with Egypt twice. For achieving a just settlement of the refugee problem, this is the only reference to Palestinians. Doesn't really talk about them much at all. I don't know if they are even ever called out by name. Certainly doesn't talk about a Palestinian state. Doesn't talk about their right to self-determination, which I think would come in a later resolution. Yeah. And then C, for guaranteeing the territory. Also, what does a just settlement even mean? For guaranteeing the territorial inviolability and political independence of every state in the area. Remember, those states are not including Palestine. There is no state of Palestine. Through measures including the establishment of demilitarization zones. And 3, request the Secretary General to designate a special representative proceed to the Middle East to establish and maintain contacts with the states concerned in order to promote agreement and assist efforts to achieve a peaceful and accepted settlement in accordance with the provisions and principles in this resolution. It requests the Secretary General to report to the Secretary Council on the progress of the efforts of the special representative as soon as possible. And then the month after this, the Khartoum Conference comes out where all of the Arab states say, fuck Israel. She ain't going to be here for very long. But this is why I say like 242 is a little bit goofy when people look at this as law. Also, keep in mind, what Resolution 242 really says is we want to actually accept the 47 partition plan. That's really what 242 says, which is also a little bit weird. So Arabs said no in 1947 to the partition plan, but then they said yes to Resolution 242, which essentially goes back to the partition plan. So it's also like kind of weird. I don't find 242 resolution arguments very compelling at all, except for when they're utilized in later agreements where Israel is committing or affirming to things.
Legally binding. And second, what does it make sense about it? It's actually pretty straightforward. It cites the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war on calls on Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. But
that is not what it says. The fact that he doesn't know that, but he has all those fucking books behind him, especially now that I've read one of them that he claims to have read, that fighting over the word "the" is pretty important. It does not claim that they're going to withdraw from the occupied territories, just from occupied territories. Who knows which ones? That was intentionally left vague.
By war on calls on Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. But deflecting...
So he's misquoting there, and he even had the quote on screen. That's pretty important.
...was Destiny's weapon of choice. Whenever he would recognize that he was losing the argument, he would either try to change the topic...
Why is it that Jordan doesn't seem to care about the border controls? Could it have to do with the fact that in 1970 the PLO and Arafat literally tried to kill the Jordanian king?
Or he would dive into a level of detail that's just completely pointless, and either you chase him down that rabbit hole and lose the point you're trying to make, or else he would cleverly accuse you of not wanting to...
Who gave you the idea to read that book? Because the fucking quote gets brought up all the time from that fucking book, and I just wanted to read the whole thing so it would never get used against me again.
Engage the details, allegedly because you're uninformed.
13,000 to 14,000 new housing units were constructed every single year. And then from, I think it was from 94 or 93 to, I think it was to 97, that number was like less than 5,000. It was only new housing units that were being constructed.
I mean, just for clarity's sake, I feel like we can get into the weeds on this.
I want to get into the weeds. That's where I want to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can go very into the weeds. I think it's very important to get into the weeds on this.
So even in places
I know you keep saying that. This is hilarious. I don't want to get lost in the weeds. I don't want to deal with history. You just don't know the facts.
Now, if you want to know the exact number of how many thousands of housing units Israel built in settlements, or how many new settlements, or how many new outposts, you can just go to Peace Now's website and see it all broken down in charts. But none of it changes the fact that all of this construction is illegal and all of it is an infringement.
Okay, his argument here is dog shit. The actual stuff that was going on, I've got more information I'll read here, is there were actually incredibly sneaky ways that Israel was aggressively pursuing expansions in the West Bank. My argument here that they were only making new houses is kind of sort of half true, but misses entirely the spirit of what Netanyahu's government especially, and even Rabin was Oslo, right? I need to remember all these people. Violated really the spirit of the Oslo Accords, even though the Oslo Accords didn't technically didn't technically call out, didn't technically call out the delaying of constructions. There's a couple things like there's a couple of, I'll have better examples of this in the future. But there's good examples of how it happened on the Palestinian side as well. There are good examples of how the Israelis were also kind of fucking with the settlement bullshit throughout the peace process here. But he doesn't know any of these because he doesn't know anything about this. Actually, I should bring up Destiny Discord drama. Okay.
I know you keep saying that. This is hilarious. I don't want to get lost in the weeds. I don't want to deal with history. You just don't know the facts.
Now, if you want to know the exact number of how many thousands of housing units Israel built in settlements, or how many new settlements, or how many new outposts, you can just go to Peace Now's website and see it all broken down in charts. But none of it changes the fact that all of this construction is illegal and all of it is an infringement on Palestinians' right to their land. And another tactic he used is whenever he could not defend Israel's indefensible policies, he would crack jokes. Did you know that at the beginning of the blockade, potato chips were not allowed in, sodas were not allowed in, cookies were not allowed in? Can you explain to me what threat cookies pose to Israel from your perspective?
Well, if they're the kilo elf ones, it's like 200 calories a cookie, so maybe they just didn't want people getting fat.
But the most interesting exchange was about me accurately.
Oh, and he doesn't point out anymore. I think it was the, I haven't actually looked this up directly. Oh, we can look this up directly. But I'm pretty sure that those rockets that were used, are a lot of them, the field is literally constructed from sugar and fertilizer. Why did Israel ban potato chips, cookies, Gaza Strip? The fuck is this website? Oh, in 2010, they lifted the ban on food items. I think these rockets are the ones. Oh, fuck, I'd have to go and look into like the fucking. I don't think they use these anymore. Also, that might have been why the ban was lifted in 2010, because I think the rocket fuel got a little bit more sophisticated. The utility of the Qassam rocket design is assumed to be ease and speed of manufacture using common tools and components. To this end, the rockets are propelled by a solid mixture of sugar and potassium nitrate, a common fertilizer. The word is filled with smuggled or scavenged TNT and urea nitrate. Another common fertilizer. The word's explosive material is similar to the civilian explosive ammonite. Does it say anywhere in here, can you like get like sugar from like cookies in an easy way to make these rockets? I don't know. I don't know what the fuck this website is. I'm worried I'm on some Mossad shit. I'll add this to my thing. We'll look this up.
Quoting Israeli Foreign Minister Shlomo Ben Ami when he said that had he been Palestinian, he would not have accepted Israel's offer at Camp David II.
Camp
Well, Gaston, thanks for the 20 Destiny memberships. I love you, buddy.
David was not the miss.
What is interesting is a substantial quantity of explosive material for Hamas rockets now comes from Israeli unexploded ordnance. There was a good New York Times piece on it. So the thing really driving rocket manufacturing through the war has been Israel bombing. Ironically, that wouldn't surprise me that much. Huh?
Opportunity for the Palestinians, and if I were a Palestinian, I would have rejected Camp David as well. This is something I put in the book.
The quote from the debate is extremely clear and straightforward, but in a desperate attempt
There's a lot. So I haven't hit this part in the book yet, which is ironically the main reason why I'm reading this book. But there is a lot of talk in the book about like, this is why the Israelis wouldn't have accepted this. This is why the Palestinians wouldn't have accepted this. My guess is going to be that when I reach that particular part, it's going to be like every other particular part where what Shlomo Ben Ami does in this book is he describes like, these are the conditions on the ground such that like these people wouldn't accept this. After the 67 war, Israel would have never made peace because the Arabs were humiliated, and the Arabs don't want peace. They want unconditional surrender of Israel. So Israel wouldn't accept anything. The Arabs wouldn't accept anything. Like these are the ways that Shlomo Ben Ami describes a lot of the deals and a lot of the setups in the book for why people wouldn't accept things. But people always use this quote to make it sound like, oh, well, it's because the deal was so fucking bad. What's the name of the book? Scars of War, Wounds of Peace.
deflect. Destiny says that instead of believing your eyes and ears, what you should do is
Is this guy bad faith or misinformed? Probably a combination of both. I just don't think he knows much. He probably hasn't read any books about this because he doesn't even have like a comprehensive understanding of everything. It seems like he's just regurgitating a lot of headlines that he's read, basically. But also keep in mind, this 9-minute video, this is his like highlights where he feels like he was the most correct. This whole debate was pretty embarrassing of him just like dancing from one thing to the next without really understanding anything he's talking about.
or read the book so that you would understand that the quote actually means something else.
People accuse me of not knowing anything about this topic, but then I understand when you're debating things like this, you don't know anything about the topic, and that's why you get upset when you talk about like getting in the weeds. Even that quote
Are you gonna read his master's thesis? I read the thesis or whatever, like the intro or whatever. It looked like it just had to do with Israeli lobbying influence in the U.S., which seemed boring as fuck. So I don't care.
earlier from the Israeli foreign minister about how, like, I wouldn't have accepted the deal if I was Palestinian at the time. That's not what he said. That's not what that quote says. If you actually go to the book, you actually read the passage where he talks about it. What he said was that conditions were not right at the time for Palestinians to feel like they could accept that deal.
Now, the bad news for Destiny is I didn't just read the book. I took meticulous notes because I was working on my master's thesis
I don't believe this.
on the subject when this book came out.
I don't believe that he read this book. I can't believe it. I can't believe that he didn't retain any of the information. Because he would have known, he would have had so many better counter arguments. For instance, he would have had really good counter arguments for that West Bank expansion stuff under Netanyahu. He wouldn't have needed to show a graph that he found on Twitter, because now I know those arguments against Netanyahu slowing down expansions or settlements.
And sure enough, what he claims about Camp David simply isn't there. Now, this is where it gets really funny. Destiny further embarrasses himself by tweeting a video at me made by one of his coolest followers mocking me because he thought that it proved me wrong about this quote. Check it out. I think it's important to engage in good faith and to know what you're talking about and to not say things that you don't understand.
Ben-Ami doesn't talk about settlements that much, I don't think, does he? Yes, he brings them up a lot. He always brings up when there's settlement expansion going on as a way of basically destroying any future peace processes. Yeah, because the settlements are always a major pain point for Palestinians. They're a major defense point for far-right extremists in the government. Like,
I've watched that debate with Israel's foreign minister on more than one occasion. What he was saying is that the deal that was offered to Palestinians at the end of Camp David was a bad deal, and if he were Palestinian, he would not have accepted it.
Since it's taking a while, I should have watched this video. This has to do with Taba. To be fair, the Taba negotiations pretty much immediately followed. It was in the same year of the Camp David. Palestinians could have accepted the real. Well, actually, this is a better quote too, though. Admittedly, however, Camp David might not have been the deal the Palestinians could have accepted. When he's talking about this here, he's not talking about Camp David was a dog shit deal that fucked over the Palestinians. He just means the conditions weren't ripe. Something that he talks about a lot on a lot of different bilateral peace agreements here. The conditions weren't ripe for peace or for these particular deals. December, in a meeting in the cabinet room adjacent to the Oval Office, where President Clinton presented to an Israeli delegation presided over by the sovereign and a Palestinian team headed by Yasser Abdrabbo his final parameters for a peace treaty between the parties. The parameters were not the arbitrary and centered whim of a lame duck president. They represented brilliantly devised points of equilibrium between the positions. Ooh, whoever made this video, way to go, dumb fuck. I should have watched the whole thing before retweeting this video. Whoever made this video, this down here, these are talking about the Clinton parameters. These aren't actually talking about Camp David. So the Clinton parameters, and then it goes Camp David, then Clinton parameters, then Taba Summit. So these brilliantly devised points of equilibrium between the positions of the parties, blah, 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 are the Clinton parameters, not Camp David. Way to go, dumb fuck.
And
that's literally not what he said. If you watch the debate, and I watched that debate, it was literally hosted on Democracy Now!, and he's quoting his own book. And if you go back and read the book instead of just watching a YouTube video, you'll see the context of what was given. What was given was that
we'll make that available. I'm glad you're saying that. I think we're going to be able to clip this up. I'm going to clip up that part of the debate. We'll put it up there with a quote of the book, which I have sitting on my shelf. I'm happy to do all of this.
As it turned out, the Intifada could not usher in a negotiated settlement precisely because, lacking attainable objectives, it raised the expectations of Palestinians to unrealistic heights. Not an Israeli negotiator, but Hani al-Hassan, an old-time associate of Arafat, was forced to acknowledge that not only was the Intifada devoid of clear strategic objectives, it also raised the expectations of Palestinian masses to such heights that it became impossible for their own leaders to meet. The Intifada, he wrote...
That's pretty cute, but the problem is that the confused person who made this video grabbed book quotes not about the Camp David offer that I was referencing, but about a different set of negotiations at Taba. And the reason why that distinction is really important is because the Camp David offer that I referenced and that Ben-Ami said he would not accept had he been Palestinian happened in the summer of 2000, several months before the Intifada. Whereas the harsh conditions being referenced in the book here in this video talk about conditions being created by the Intifada that made future negotiations and an agreement more difficult for Palestinians to accept. So those conditions could not have possibly been in reference to the Camp David offer that Ben-Ami was talking about.
So he's correct here. He is right here. The Intifada conditions made it hard to accept Taba. But why is he saying he would have rejected Camp David? Why not talk about the conditions leading up to Camp David? Why is he selective in his application here of conditions leading people not to accept things? Wait, what?
Talking about in this quote, because the Intifada had not happened yet. And yet, Destiny is so clueless that he just doubled down on his obvious error. And he's such a grifter that he even tried to take credit for having guessed what—
I did take credit for this because this was true. My interpretation of that quote is correct and his is incorrect. And I knew that he got it from that stupid fucking video. And he literally quote tweeted me and like posted that stupid fucking video.
Interview I got this Ben-Ami quote from, even though I had already mentioned the source when I first shared the quote with him. And by the way, if Destiny knows Ben-Ami's book so well, he probably would have noticed that in it, Ben-Ami proves almost every argument that Destiny himself spent our entire debate trying.
Wait, what does he think? Hold on.
That in it, Ben-Ami
The most absurd march of folly that the state of Israel has ever embarked on, the creation of a dense map of settlements throughout the territories that narrowed the living space of the Palestinian people, Israel destroyed beyond repair the faith of its Palestinian partners in the peace process. This is true, but I don't have all the. I think I took notes on this. This is. He's actually doing the thing that I say people do with the conflicts where they only selectively quote one side. Ben Ami always talks about both sides fucking themselves over and over and over again. And he talks about, I don't know why he's only quoting the Israeli f-ups here. Let me see if I can find the page this is on. Fuck, I wish he would put page numbers. I think it's around 2:15. Hold on. Oh, yes, okay. So I will read this. I remember reading this. He does this a lot throughout the book. Oh, and I hate this slimy fuck. The thing that upsets me the most now is I don't know if this guy has just not read the book, in which case he's an asshole because he's quoting shit he hasn't read from a book pretending he read it, or he has read the book and he is being incredibly dishonest. Yeah. So I'm just going to read like a couple paragraphs here, okay? The Oslo process bequeathed additional fallacies to the teams that were later to negotiate the final settlement at Camp David and Taba. The incremental nature of the process left wide open the shape of the final agreement, certainly the perception of the Israelis, and hence encouraged their governments to persist in their existing policies in the territories. Through what was and continues to be the most absurd march of folly that the state of Israel has ever embarked on, the creation of a dense map of settlements throughout the territories that narrowed the living space of the Palestinian people, Israel destroyed beyond repair the faith of its Palestinian partners in the peace process. But again, amazing as it may sound, there is nothing in the letter of the Oslo Accords that prevented the creation of the settlements. The blame should be put at the door of the Palestinian negotiators who all came from Tunis and had no knowledge of the conditions on the ground. So, without getting too much into this, a lot of the negotiations that happened at Oslo were because Arafat wanted to hold on to power. He didn't actually know what the fuck was going on in Israel. The only reason why he negotiated the way he did is because he just wanted to maintain power in the eyes of the Israeli government so he could continue to be a fucking billionaire. But I'll continue. The blame should be put at the door of the Palestinian negotiators who all came from Tunis and had no knowledge of the conditions on the ground. Local leaders who had been brought up under the occupation and the arrogance and agrarian hunger of the settlers would not have let this happen. Loyal to the old, archaic Zionist philosophy, according to which the last kindergarten often defines the political border, the Israelis tried to influence the nature of the final agreement by a hectic policy of settlement expansion. The Palestinians responded with terrorism. It was the fatal symmetry between settlements and terrorism that became the hallmark of the Oslo years. The expression, peace of the brave, used ad nauseum by Arafat, never convinced anyone, not even Rabin, that the commitments Arafat undertook were indeed irrevocable. Notwithstanding his pledge to renounce violence, he never really relinquished the terror card. It was precisely this that destroyed Rabin politically before he was destroyed physically by a Jewish zealot, because he was assassinated. It was the same terror card that would also bring about the defeat of Shimon Peres and the ascendancy of Benjamin Netanyahu in the aftermath of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Arafat excelled in destroying his peace partners and in directly enhancing the prospects of the hard right in Israel. But the incompatibilities between the leaders were not only a question of difference in personalities, they were also fed by the major fallacies and inconsistencies inherent in the Oslo process. So he's pulling one part of this quote and he's completely ignoring what's happening after. Why would you do that? Fuck you.
Proves almost every argument.
As a matter of fact, neither Rabin nor especially Peres wanted the autonomy to usher in a Palestinian state. As late as 1997, that is 4 years in the Oslo process, when I proposed the first time the party endorsed the idea of a Palestinian state, it was Shimon Peres who most vehemently opposed the idea. Did I read this part yet? What page does this come from? Somebody said. How long does it take you to read the book? I spent about a week and a half, but I've only been reading like an hour or two each day. This is a slog, especially if you're not familiar with the history. I think it's interesting though, but only because we've studied so much. Somebody tell me what page this is from, and I can look this up. 220. Okay, then I have read this. Where were we? Okay, so one of the things that's spoken about a lot is that sometimes Israeli leaders and sometimes Arab leaders don't want to do a particular thing, but conditions on the ground make it such that they have to. And sometimes what Shlomo Ben-Ami is talking about in this book is that there are times when Begin, when Rabin, these guys didn't actually want to negotiate peace. They didn't want it, but because of the conditions, they eventually did. That's what this passage is talking about. So I'm going to read, I'll read from the paragraph above and then go a paragraph after. Rabin was less of a peace architect than some commentators believed him to be. His peace strategy developed almost malgré lui. His intention was to stick to the capsule theory. So the capsule theory is this idea of constant bilateral negotiations and avoiding a total settlement with all the Arab states that I think came under, Begin. Mechanim Begin was the guy that started this idea of the capsule theory. He never intended to negotiate with the PLO, nor did he think he would go with the Palestinians beyond the autonomy stage. As a matter of fact, neither Rabin nor especially Perez wanted the autonomy to usher in a Palestinian state. As late as 1997, that is 4 years into the Oslo process, when, as the chairman of the Labour Party's Foreign Affairs Committee, I proposed for the first time that the party endorsed the idea of a Palestinian state, it was Shimon Peres who most vehemently opposed the idea. He still believed in a Jordanian-Israeli-Palestinian condominium in the territories. A Palestinian state was clearly not within Rabin's priorities either, but the failure of his Syrian enterprise brought him to Oslo, and this, regardless of the letter of the accord, could only lead sooner or later to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. And Oslo, to Rabin's surprise, created such a panic in Jordan that King Hussein finally came out of the closet and rushed to make peace with Israel. The hysteria in Jordan was such that the moment he knew of the Oslo Accord, the king ordered the closure of the bridges linking the West and the East banks for fear of a mass exodus of Palestinians that would end up subverting the Jordanian state. The May 1994 Israeli-PLO economic agreement was an additional threat to Hussein, who now saw his kingdom's economic ties with the West Bank seriously undermined. To the king, a common Israeli-Palestinian economic space meant unemployment and political instability in Jordan. So this basically talks about how originally Israel just wanted to figure out with Jordan what to do with the West Bank, but as conditions on the ground changed and as their Syria enterprise failed to make peace with Syria, they were basically like, okay, fuck it, we have to negotiate this, right? So they did end up trying to negotiate this, Rabin and Perez, they did, and Jordan's king obviously was not very happy with that, but...
Given that Destiny himself...
The Al-Aqsa Intifada did not start merely as a tactical move, it erupted out of the accumulated rage and frustration of the Palestinian masses, the colossal failure of the peace process since the days earlier. I don't think I've read up to this point yet, but anyway, yeah, sorry, fuck, this guy very, very, very... just the quotes I've read so far, he's like very selectively quoting, which is really annoying because from what I've read so far, Shlomo does a really good job at giving perspectives on both sides. Here is the missed opportunities from the Israelis. Here are the bad expectations from them. Here are where they fucked up in the process. Here's where other Arab states have fucked up in the process. Here's where the Soviet Union and America has fucked up in the process. And here's where the Palestinians have fucked up in the process. He does a really good job representing all sides. Quoting Shlomo Ben-Ami's book here and only taking one side is a literal fucking crime and betrays the entire fucking purpose of the book. That would be like reading the Gospels and omitting the part where Jesus dies and pretending he lives happily ever after. It like misses the entire point of why he wrote this, which is really fucking annoying.
Spent our entire debate trying to deny. And what's remarkable is that there is a cult-like quality to social media today that is immune to counter-evidence. Whether it's Destiny or Alex Jones or any other grifter who gains prominence by peddling nonsense to a large and loyal fan base, it really highlights that we're in a post-truth environment. It's why even someone like Lex Friedman, in a well-meaning attempt to enhance understanding about Palestine and Israel, finds himself trying to host a debate between actual experts, like Maureen Rabbani and Norman Finkelstein on one hand, and then a clueless YouTuber like Destiny being thrown in the mix. Because grifters are actually good at sounding like they know what they're talking about. And it takes real knowledge and effort to tell experts and charlatans apart.
What a disgusting fuck. And he even puts Palestinian in his profile. Actually gross. He said it was a Palestinian American in our debate. Ugh. But anyway. Okay. Tomorrow, I have to we're going to build the timeline. Somebody figure out how to do this and either email me or post it on the subreddit, or I'm going to figure out how to do it. I want to be able to make a nice timeline for my notes. Yeah. Do you want to read this guy's thesis? No, not really. Norman Finkelstein appears to have confused me with Joan Peters. Oh! I don't know if that's a burn or not. American journalist and broadcaster. Okay. He views 1948, and I'm sure most other years, through a thick film of preconceived notions and prejudices. In describing In the Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, 1947 and 1949, and 1948 and after, what actually happened in 1948, rather than what generations of Israeli and Palestinian propagandists said had happened, I had hoped that at least some preconceptions and prejudices on both sides might fall away. It seems that I've had some success in this respect in Israel. Finkelstein is wrong about the degree of penetration of my work into the Israeli consciousness. The quotations from Yitzhak Rabin, Menahem Milson, and Amos Kanan notwithstanding, even before the publication of Birth in Hebrew, a high school history textbook, My Galut Lekomiet, From Exile to Establishment / Independence, Volume 1 by David Shahar, carried a 4-page extract from one of my articles on the Palestinian Exodus, originally published in Haaretz in 1989. Birth has already required reading in courses at several Israeli universities. Would that a similar penetration had occurred on the Palestinian side? To judge from Finkelstein's and Masal's critiques of Birth in 1948, this has not yet happened. Clearly, outworn preconceptions and prejudices prevail. He wishes a similar penetration occurred on the Palestinian side. These underlie and tarnish Finkelstein's and Masalah's articles. In the case of Finkelstein, the critique is accompanied and reinforced by innuendo and distortion, inevitably reminding one of the method and substance of Shabtai Tevet's critiques of my work. Indeed, it is no accident that Finkelstein quotes Tevet to bolster his own assertions. This was written in, I think I read this before we started. This is from 1991, by the way, 33 years ago, so funny. How do you mix up Benny Morris with Joan Peters? I'm guessing Joan Peters didn't do the best of journalistic work. It was a tongue-in-cheek joke. I think Benny is a little bit, yeah. With almost unfailing consistency, Palestinian historians, ideologues, and journalists since 1948 have asserted that the exodus of Palestine's Arabs was the result of a pre-planned, systematic policy of expulsion by the Yishuv. Both Finkelstein and Masalha subscribe to this view. I'm just gonna learn we are gonna learn these languages. I bet we could learn a language. If we did 30 minutes a day, do you think we could? Is there an introduction? Can I just get the name, please?
To this evening today. My name is Emma Davis. I'm a Joint Equalities Officer for, is there any point in using this? Yeah. Okay. For Barking and Dagenham National Education Union. And I'm also a member of Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I recently took part in the delegation last October.
No one cares.
Union there, the meeting tonight, and we have really incredible speakers. I do want to apologize. He already knew when he agreed to come that he was. But we do have a fantastic platform of speakers. We're going to I'll be introducing each.
Say the name.
An academic and historian. He's a professor of religion and politics at SOAS. And he's also written many books on Palestine, including the book that. So without further ado, Noor.
Thank you.
She just said his first name? No! Okay, don't care. Masalha is what I'm going to call him. Masalha. Were expelled systematically and with premeditation. Zionist policy throughout was one of expulsion. In tracing and analyzing the Palestinian exodus between December of 1947 and autumn of 1949, I discovered a whole range of factors at play. These included the structural weaknesses of Palestinian society, military, political, social, and economic, the devolution of British rule and administration, and the breakdown of law and order in the towns over December of 1947 and May of 1948, Arab orders to leave addressed to particular communities or sections of communities, women, children, and old people, lack of food and other supplies, unemployment and high prices, Jewish threats, Jewish attacks, Jewish atrocities, Jewish expulsion orders, and fear, a great deal of fear. Fear of Jewish attacks, fear of Jewish atrocities, fear of life under Jewish rule, fear of the Arab irregular bands, fear of Husseini revenge. Husseini? Is that the same Husseini, just spelled differently, or? This is also unacceptable. This Husseini is the same as this Husseini. It's just spelled differently, right? This is unhinged that people do this. Also spelled completely fucking differently. I found that different factors and combinations of factors affected different Arab communities in the course of the war. I ended up with a multi-causal explanation in which the primary precipitants of flight in most places and at most times were Jewish attack and Arab fears of Jewish attack. This multi-causal multi-staged explanation, which is irrefutably supported by the documentation, sits poorly with those like Finkelstein, Masalha, and Shabtai Teveth, who like their history simple. Teveth argues Arab orders, at least until mid-May of 1948, and Israeli expulsion policy thereafter were responsible for the exodus. And Finkelstein and Masalha argue Israeli expulsions throughout. Finkelstein and Masalha share a method. They selectively quote from Birth in 1948 what suits their purposes while ignoring and, in Finkelstein's case, ridiculing what doesn't. Interesting. Neither seems to know anything about 1948 beyond what is to be found in the books. Oh my God. This is not me. That's not a ban. That's Cloudflare. It's on your side. Cloudflare is rejecting your shit. Okay. God, fuck. Okay. Neither seems to know anything about 1948 beyond what is to be found in my books, and neither marshals sources or material from elsewhere that could serve to contradict my findings, except the odd reference to a newspaper article by Uri Milstein, the odd quote from Teveth, and a word or two by Walid Khalidi. Something that makes me really scared, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with this in the future, because realistically, I just can't do this, and it's so frustrating. I have a plan, though. I do have a plan. Something that's so frustrating is... could have accepted? Oh, actually, you know what? Wait, I'll just find the post. I don't know how much of a book I need to read in order to understand a quote now. Before I thought if I just read, usually I would do the paragraph before and the paragraph after to get like a little bit of context of what the quote's about. But then I was like, well, let's read a page before and a page after so we get like more context. But when I look at the way, for instance, the book that we finished reading on stream yesterday and the day before, the way that Shlomo Ben Avi structures his book is he structures it between this is what the Palestinians did wrong, this is what the Israelis did wrong, this is some other shit, right? You could read a whole 5-10 pages and come away thinking like, wow, this was completely and totally Arafat's fault, 100%. It was all his fault. Or, wow, Israel completely fucked all of this up. There's no way the Palestinians could have ever had peace. Israel fucked everything up. So now I don't know if I should read the chapter or if I just have to read the whole book for every single quote that comes out. I'm actually really curious now to reread this post, now that I've read this book, where we fought so much over this singular quote. So for context, this is the quote from the debate that Wikipedia is referring to. Shlomo Ben Ami, yes, okay. The last third part of the book, as Dr. Finkelstein says, there is the diplomat, and the same diplomat still behaves in a way as a historian when he says in this book that Camp David was not the missed opportunity for the Palestinians, and if I were a Palestinian, I would have rejected Camp David as well. This is something I put in the book, but Taba is the problem. The Clinton parameters are the problem, because the Clinton parameters, in my view, so I understand now. Now I fully understand what Ben-Ami means here. When he says that the same diplomat still behaves in a way as a historian, when he says in the book that Camp David was not, when he says he's behaving as a historian, he's saying that he's looking at the historical context and he's saying Palestinians couldn't have accepted this deal, historically speaking. That's what he means. I understand what he means now when he says this. That same diplomat still behaves in a way as a historian. I wonder if he's referring to himself here. I think it is. I think he is referring to himself. He's just speaking in the third person for some reason. I wonder if I should watch this
debate. Some of the headlines have some very strong quotes and brief.
I read the transcript, and it feels like Finkelstein cuts this guy off so many times like crazy.
Is that a major problem with Oslo, on top of it, was that it solved very minor issues such as Gaza and even people on the far Israeli right were ready.
But it left open huge issues like what about Temple Mount? What about the Old City? What about Palestinian state?
To give away Gaza, but it left open the future. The future was unknown. The two sides, the two parties, started to embark on a process when they had diametrically opposed views as to the final objective. There was nothing as to what will happen about Jerusalem. It was only said that we will negotiate Jerusalem. What about refugees? Nothing clear was said, just that we will negotiate the refugees. So the thing that the fact that the future was left.
So Omar Badar was right when he told you so. You made fun of him and ridiculed him just to now admit you understand the quote. No. A lot of what I've said before reading this book was correct. It was just more correct than I even realized. Now I have a deeper understanding of why it was correct. My takeaway in the debate with him was that this quote was not saying that it was a bad deal for the Palestinians. That remains true to this day. Badar did not read that book. I would bet my life on it. If he has highlights in that book, it's because he was using it for an essay or a thesis, and he borrowed it from a friend who'd already read it, and he said, just go through my highlights or something. There is no shot that he read that book and would use that quote in that way, especially because, no offense, why the would I quote a YouTube video when I've read the book? I'm not going to quote an interview that he's given on Democracy Now! When he's quoting his own book. I'm just going to talk about the book. Why the you ever do that unless you haven't read the book, obviously. I find when reading books about history, it is impossible to be in good faith, take a singular quote from a book and present it in support of your argument to someone who hasn't read the book. You can do this, okay? There is only one person, I think, on my entire stream who has ever done this. And it is, okay, here. Jesus Christ. And it is Joanne, the silly serious or whatever. There you go. Don't link not safe for work in chat. Because what Joanne can do is Joanne will say, rather than just saying this feminist said this person, she'll say, oh, this is why this author says this thing, because she's talking about this thing, and this book is about this thing, and that's how it ties into this concept, and these are what these blah, 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 right? When Joanne talks, I think Joanne is probably the only person that I've ever heard actually summarize academic sources, and it sounds like she has a full understanding of the source, she has a full understanding of the context of the quote she's giving, if she's even giving a quote, because oftentimes, by the way, fuck quotes. Quotes don't even matter much. Why the fuck would we care about a quote? Give me substance. I think it's, is it Joanna? Joe? Whatever the fuck it is. I don't give a fuck. Okay. Yeah. But Joe is really good at giving context to quotes. Most people are not. This is why I've said over and over and over again, doesn't she literally have a PhD? Who the fuck? Apparently that means nothing. Finkelstein has a PhD. But yeah, she's one of the only people that that's able to do that. Sorry, okay. Of course, the juicy part is this. Camp David was not the missed opportunity for the Palestinians, and if I were Palestinian, I would have rejected Camp David as well. Turns out that the book is available online for borrowing at openlibrary.org. Here's a link in the case you want to read through it as well. Oh, and we also read this whole chapter and like the last 3 chapters of the book too, so right. So you guys have, most of you have heard this as well. I believe this quote is referring to page 270 where Mr. Ben-Ami writes the following. He then proceeds to describe the Clinton parameters on the type of summit exactly as he started to in the debate. He also a couple pages later says that General Shaul Mofaz, then Israeli chief of the general staff, called accepting the Clinton parameters almost tantamount to a coup d'etat, which is again something that he mentions in the interview right after the cited part, which further solidifies my position that this is the part that both Finkelstein and Ben-Ami were referring to. Further in the book, he then describes the events around the Clinton parameter, more importantly, the type of summit, where he concludes with personal opinion that given the political situation in Israel at the time, this is the last opportunity to make a deal like this for years to come. And he was right. Just 2 weeks later, the Likud, headed by Ariel Sharon, won the elections. It was also interesting that we proceeded the quote. Ben-Ami describes how the second intifada heightened the expectations of Palestinian people to unrealistic heights and therefore couldn't usher in a negotiated settlement. Okay, in my opinion, he doesn't say that he would reject Camp David because the negotiations were bad. He simply opines that due to various reasons, the Palestinian people simply wouldn't accept it at the time. He then also says that the real missed opportunity. Yes, this is true. Okay, so this guy's summary was good. And I mainly parroted this summary because I also read a little bit before and after. But now that I've read the whole book, this opinion is very true. Badar did not read this book. He does not know the context of the quote. And I was 100% correct when I called him out in the debate before he even finished the quote and said, you're getting this from a video interview. Why are you doing this? Yes, okay. I wonder if I could find in this YouTube video. There's not like transcripts for this. I wonder what it sounds like when it comes up. Camp David, Camp David. It seems like it's coming up early on, kind of.
Grief and hatred. Explain that further.
Well, you see, there is a whole range of for the Palestinians.
I did want you to step back, Shlomo Ben-Ami, and give us an overview of the whole peace process, of which you were a part, a critical player in this, the Oslo Peace Accords.
The right of self-determination for the Palestinians doesn't even mention the need of the Israelis to put an end to settlements. With Oslo was unknown that we will negotiate the refugees. Active ambiguity might...
In accordance with the fundamental principle of international law, cited 3 times by Mr. Ben-Ami in his book, that it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. The West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem having been acquired by war, it's inadmissible for Israel to keep them. They have to be returned. On the
That word is incorrect. They don't have to be returned. He wants them to be liberated. It's not a good argument, because returned would be giving them back to the countries that also acquired them through war.
Side, and also the side of the neighboring Arab states, they have to recognize Israel's right to live in peace and security with its neighbors.
True.
That was the quid pro quo. Recognition of Israel, Palestinian right to self-determination in the West Bank and Gaza with its capital in Jerusalem. That's the international consensus. It's not complicated. It's also not controversial. You see it voted on every year in the United Nations. The vote's typically something like 160 nations on one side, the United States, Israel, and Nauru, Palau, Tuvalu, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands on the other.
Are you planning on reading any of Norm's books? Oh, he repeats these 4 islands. He does this 30 years later. He loves bringing up these islands. He did it in another debate of his I reviewed recently. I was going to read Inquest into Martyrdom, that Gaza book, but then somebody made a big subreddit post saying I shouldn't even waste my time.
Other side. That's it. Now, the Israeli government was fully aware that this was the international consensus, but they were opposed, A, to a full withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza, and Jerusalem, of course, and 2, they were opposed to creating a Palestinian state in the occupied territories. Come 1981, as pressure built...
Nobody, I don't think anybody in 67 was talking about an Palestinian state.
Israel to reach a diplomatic settlement in the Israel-Palestine conflict, they decided to invade Lebanon in order to crush the PLO because the PLO was on record supporting a 2-state settlement. As Dr. Ben-Ami's colleague, Avner Yanni...
That's the only reason they wanted to crush the PLO in Lebanon is because they wanted a 2-state settlement? That's the only reason?
Put it in a very excellent book, Dilemmas of Security. He said the main problem for Israel was, and now I'm quoting him, the PLO's peace offensive. They wanted a 2-state settlement. Israel did not, and so Israel decides to crush the PLO in Lebanon. It successfully did so. The PLO goes into exile.
I can't use the volume thing. God damn it.
Some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!
War ends, Iraq defeated, and all the Gulf states cut off all of their money to the PLO. The PLO is going down the tubes. Along comes Israel with a clever idea. Mr. Rabin says, let's throw Arafat a life preserver, but on condition. And Dr. Ben-Ami puts it excellently, that the PLO will be Israel's subcontractor and collaborator in the occupied territories, and I'm quoting Dr. Ben-Ami, in order to suppress the genuinely democratic tendencies of the Palestinians. Now,
the genuinely democratic tendencies of the Palestinians. What?
It's true, exactly as Dr. Ben-Ami said, that Israel had 2 options after the Iraq War. It could have negotiated with the real representatives of the Palestinians who wanted that full 2-state settlement in accordance with the international consensus, or it can negotiate with Arafat in the hope that he's so desperate that he's going to...
This might be a good argument. Axel brought up this argument. I don't know about this. So at one point, I need like, oh God. Wait, hold on. Would I say this? Cleavage counts as not safe for work? Yeah, I would. You got a 12-hour ban. Stop. I just got fired from my job.
Serve as their collaborator and subcontractor in order to...
But also, hold on. Let me wait a few seconds. Okay. Please go to Justical Server. Talk there, okay?
Deny the Palestinians what they're entitled to under international law. The Israelis chose Arafat. Not only because Arafat himself was desperate, they chose him because they thought he would deny them what they were entitled to. He would suppress all resistance to the occupation.
Professor Norman.
I'm so curious why Israel chose to negotiate with Arafat over the negotiators in D.C. Shlomo Ben-Ami writes about that in his book, but it's like one sentence about it. I'm curious what the choice was there. Like why Israel did it. I can think of some reasons, but I don't really want to. I don't have any subject matter experts this deep in the shit anymore, do I? We're just kind of on our own here. And by me, I mean, or by us, I mean me. We need Ben-Ami to come back and address the fact that every pro-Palestinian in the world said one misquote. I tried to email him. I don't know if he'll ever respond. I don't even know if he does these things. I don't know if he checks email because he's pretty old now, but. Anyway, sorry. Back to reading this paper that we have to like page 3 on. Finkelstein adopts Tevet's critique of my 4-stage or 4.5-stage periodization of the Exodus, preferring, like Tevet, the black and white division of the Exodus into 2 periods on either side of the 14th, 15th of May of 1948 watershed. Before that date, argues Tevet, the Arab Exodus was due to Arab orders. Thereafter, there was an Israeli expulsion policy. Finkelstein, by contrast, argues that an expulsion policy reigned throughout, but that before the 14th, 15th of May, it was covert, and thereafter, overt. Tevet argues that the Haganah Israel Defense Force, the IDF, unleashed a full-fledged policy of expulsion after the 15th of May in response to the Arab invasion of Palestine. In a fight to the finish, one doesn't quibble over much about means. Quote, they want war, we'll give them war, end quote. Finkelstein, for whom the only good Israeli is an evil Israeli, argues that the malevolent Zionists, always bent on expulsion, carried out the policy covertly before the 14th and 15th of May in order to avoid provoking Western political diplomatic intervention, which might have taken the form of reneging on support for Jewish independence. The Yishuv switched to overt expulsion after the 14th and 15th of May as the state was in the bag, and as there was by then no, or almost no, fear of Western intervention. The policy could now be carried out with virtual impunity, writes Finkelstein. The only problem with Finkelstein's and Masalha's and Tevet's assertion is that they do not conform with what actually happened and they lack any documentary foundation. His death online, he wrote an op-ed. Wait, what are we talking about? What Israeli guy? Unironically, my kick chat is so much better, I think, for these streams than my other fucking DGG shit chat. My God. Does it even matter if the West supports Israel in 1948? I thought Israel fought the war basically by themselves. They did. They didn't really have support from the West. We were discussing whether Shlomo Ben-Ami was alive. He just wrote an op-ed. Oh, he just gave a speech in front of some delegation. I watched this. It's like a 20-minute speech after October 7th. This one. Oh, yeah. But he's getting old now. But he's still sharp.
By its
I think.
friends in the internet.
Okay. All right. Ready? Also, if you don't have the answer to anything, that's fine. Just let me know, okay? Or if you know where to find it, let me know, okay? Ready?
Okay.
Okay. Are you pretty familiar with the Oslo Accords, the negotiations leading up to them and everything?
Leading up to them, not so much. More during.
Okay. General feeling I have, and by feeling I have, I mean I'm co-opting this from the Ben-Ami book, and I'm co-opting this from things that other people have said, like that Badar. Fuck, I need to remember his name. The Saudi Arabian foreign minister or whatever. But basically, the Oslo Accords. One of the reasons. Now, there's blame on both sides here, or all three sides, I guess, for the mediators. Part of the Oslo Accords are not mediators. Part of the reason why the Oslo Accords were really fucked is because not just what was written into them, but the reason why they were written so poorly is because the Oslo Accords were kind of a way for Arafat, who is quickly losing legitimacy in the Palestinian world, to kind of maintain his hold on the Palestinian world. That if Arafat negotiated in a way, however he needed to create a new government, he would be the head of that government, and therefore he wasn't as concerned about like the Palestinian people. He just wanted to kind of negotiate whatever he could to maintain his legitimacy in the Palestinian world. So when the Oslo Accords were negotiated by Rabin, they opted to negotiate with Arafat. However, Arafat didn't know anything. I don't even think he lived in Palestine for a while. I think he lived in Tunisia.
He was in Tunisia.
Yeah, in Tunis. Tunis? Is that how you pronounce the city name? What is it?
Tunisia?
What's
So I
the
thought you
city?
said it. Oh, Tunis. I don't know how to
Tunis?
say that one.
Okay, that's what I was saying. Okay. Yeah, but he was in Tunisia. Now, there were on-the-ground Palestinian leaders that had a way better understanding of what the Palestinians wanted, what they needed, and what negotiations would look like. And they were working on negotiations in D.C. between them and Israeli negotiators. Now, ultimately, Israel ends up negotiating with Arafat. Do you know anything more about that choice to negotiate with Arafat over the delegation in D.C. from the Palestinians? Do you have any idea about that, or?
As far as I know, it's just because Arafat had like popularity and recognition as being like the PLO leader guy. But I don't know if there's any more special reason than that.
Huh. Okay. Do you know if there's any writing about this anywhere? Shlomo Ben-Ami brings it up in his book for all of like 1 or 2 sentences, and that's it. So.
Yeah, just like the whole idea that he was kind of taken out of retirement to be the leader. I think it's just because of his credibility.
Well, I'm just saying because like the Oslo Accords negotiated with the Palestinian delegation in D.C. would have undoubtedly been a better negotiation. However, it probably would have, or it certainly would have required more concessions from the Israelis. So like the anti-Israeli quote would be, or the anti-Israeli take would be, they preferred to negotiate in Oslo with Arafat because they knew they could squeeze a better deal out of him because of all the political pressure on him. And then the anti-Palestinian quote would be, well, Palestinians still saw Arafat as their national leader, so they looked to him as the person that represented them, so that was the only one Israel could negotiate with. I don't know I'm just giving, those would be like the 2 polar ends of that. I'm curious what the actual truth is.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm not going to remember this very well, but I remember someone saying something to me about the idea that there was actually an opportunity for a much better path to peace in Madrid that was kind of like fucked over because because the delegation was more important to that than Arafat. But and so Arafat was there, like there's just kind of like faction that blames Arafat for like for the way Oslo went, because they could have had something better earlier on through the delegation, but Arafat just wanted to be the main guy. And yeah, that's kind of where people kind of see that Arafat as a bit of a snake, but I'd have to look into it if you want a better answer, because don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
But yeah, I need to go out anyway, but I can maybe in a day or 2, eh?
Yeah. Maybe in a day or 2, you'll have an answer for me, or?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm quite interested in that, and I should have already done it, but I've been putting it off. Okay.
I love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.